Welcome to Blue Collar Startup, everybody, the podcast where hard work meets big ideas. This is your home for real talk, real stories, and real strategies from the front lines of business in the trades. I'm your host, Mike Nelson from Five Towers Media. Derek will not be joining us today. Big happenings on the Derek front. I'll let him talk about it. Although we did talk about it a little bit yesterday, I think, on the show. So if you listen to, now last week's episode, you probably have a little bit of inside baseball as far as that goes. Um, Excited about today's episode, though. We've got our Let's Ask Bill or Business Lab here going on. Bill Tansey, what's shaking, brother?
Hey, buddy. Good morning. Good
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning. I'm excited to talk about some process stuff today, man. As you know, I've been doing a lot of work the last year on my business with your help and guidance, of course, and certainly is having an impact. And this is kind of the process stuff is just so important, having those systems and processes. Before we get in that though, I do have to do a couple little things here for housekeeping. Obviously, today's a Let's Ask Bill episode. If you haven't listened for a while, we've got a couple of formats that we're doing each week. We've got the Let's Ask Bills. We've got the roundtable discussions with Catamount Consulting, Scott and Stacy over there, and Jason was on a recent episode. We've got Stacy coming on. I think it's next week actually for Women's in the Trades episode where she's going to be our guest host and bringing on connections of hers that are in the trades. And then, of course, we've got interviews from the field, which the last episode that we just did with William Day from Bassett Healthcare, which was a really interesting episode. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. William was formerly with Jersen Construction, and then recently went to Bassett Healthcare, which when I first saw that, I was like, what does that have to do with the trades? But turns out there's a lot of trade work going on in the healthcare field. So check it out. And of course, got to talk about our Patreon side of things. Bill and I are going to talk about for about 30 minutes today, talking about some process stuff. Then we're going to move over for another 15 minutes to our Patreon side of things. This is a members only portal that you can sign up for. It's $5 a month. The information and content that we're putting in the Patreon side of things is really geared towards helping people grow and scale their blue collar businesses. So if you are in the trades actively, or if you are a business owner in the trades, spend the $5 a month. Definitely worth the money. Excuse me. And last but not least, I got to talk about our sponsors. We have a lot of sponsorship opportunities for people to get involved with the show. What we do with that sponsorship money is we donate it for tools and tuition for kids in the trades, whether it's BOCES or HVCC, which we call the blue collar college, because of all the great trades programs we have. So, if you're interested in getting involved and being a part of the show and helping kids with tools and tuition, reach out to us. Email will be in the show notes. And of course, that means I got to thank our current sponsors. We've got Nick over at People's, Martin Electric, MLB Construction, Bonaccio Construction, Michaels Group, of course, Scott and Stacy and the team over at Catamount Consulting, Northeast Construction Trades Workforce Coalition, Pam and Doug over there doing some amazing work for the trades, getting kids interested young and early and getting them exposed to all the opportunities that there are in the trades. Of course, Derek's team over at Dago Cleaning Systems for all the help they give him and give him the space to be able to do the show and all the work that goes on behind the scenes, as well as our team over at Five Towers Media. Big shout out to Taylor, who does all of our production and clipping and just makes the show great. So thanks to everybody for all the help and all the work you do. And without further ado, let's talk about some process, Bill.
Cool. Cool. So you mentioned Jason, man, that guy does such a great job at talking about what he does. I just
Yeah.
listened to the recent podcast that dropped from you guys. Was it 117 maybe? I don't, is that
Yeah,
the
that sounds about right.
right around there. And yeah, I just like, listen, Jason, I sent him a text afterwards, congratulating him on a job well done for that. He's good.
Yeah, that whole team is great. I really enjoy those guys. They have just a wealth of knowledge to pass on to people. They're very passionate about that knowledge transfer too, and getting people, whether it's mindset, growth coaching, then of course the safety side of what they do, the leadership side of what they do. They're great. We actually, Chris and I had dinner with Scott and Stacy and Jason and Scott's wife recently, and just great time, and
Nice.
sharing some funny stories, and it's they're a good group of people.
Yeah.
Um, So, Bill, let's talk about some process, man. I feel like at least for the last few months, we have talked a lot about process on the show. When it comes to business in general, for years, I'm very passionate about the power of process and what it can do. But I think we should, for people that are just getting introduced to process, we should probably talk about what it actually is, right? So when we say process, what are we talking about? Systems, SOPs, habits, culture, all the above? What is process, Bill?
Yeah. So when you mentioned that's what you wanted to focus on today, I thought to myself, holy cow, like I can't believe we haven't talked about this yet already, because you're right, right? What is process? So um, when I hear the word process, what I hear is like the layman way of saying a written standard to execute to. And if you will, like in the biz or industry speak, we call it standard work. So when we think about process is a written standard to execute to, and more specifically, if you kind of work in this space, you refer to that process, or that umbrella term is standard work. So standard work sums up all the different kinds of processes. Um, and that's where it could start to become overwhelming for some people, but we simplify it by using a simple like three-piece hierarchy. So when we talk about standard work, at the top of the hierarchy is policy.
Okay.
Below policy is procedure, and below procedure is work instruction. And quite simply, policy is more of a vision setting component of the standard work, and work instruction is the gritty details of how we execute or transact day in and day out. And that makes up the, if you will, the bottom tier of that hierarchy of standard work. And if we if we organize if we think about our process in terms of standard work, and if we organize our standard work as policy, procedure, and work instruction, that really helps us manage the document lifecycle and how we create, approve, publish, utilize, edit, eventually obsolete that standard work. And it makes that standard work digestible for the team. Um, and you mentioned culture. If you've develop the standard work in a way that's digestible. Again, using a simple hierarchy like the one I just explained, that's where the team can start to embrace the standard work and use it to their benefit. And you can pivot the culture over to a culture of process change, which we would call a continuous improvement culture. And having that continuous improvement culture is usually highlighted
Hmm.
or illustrated. Do I have a continuous improvement culture? I guess the answer to that is yes. If you ask somebody how they do their job, number one, they're able to point to a document that very simply helps them do their job. That's number one. And then number two is, do you have a continuous improvement culture? Meaning, when there's a shortfall, when a metric isn't achieved, or when something's turned red as opposed to green, do the people on the team huddle together, shoulder to shoulder, and try and improve the process? Or do they point fingers at the person next to them?
Hmm.
So if you have a process-based culture, a continuous improvement culture, everybody knows how to do their job and they can tell you where it's written down. So they know what success looks like in writing. And then two, if the team falls short of success, they get together and they collectively look at how to improve that standard work or how to improve that process to improve the outcomes as opposed to pointing fingers or pointing blame.
I I love what you said. A few things that you said there. One thing that you said, the written standard to execute to. I love that. I actually wrote it down after you said it. If you saw me looking down, like I was on my phone, that's what I was doing, was writing that down because I want to make sure I reuse that Billism. The Because it says so much to it, in that one sentence, right? Number one, that process needs to be written down. So it can't just be something that's in somebody's head or, I hear this all the time and I've been guilty of this. Like, well, we have a way of doing things. We have a process, but it's not written down anywhere. It's just what we do,
Right.
right? But then also like to execute to, and I think that is a very important thing as well because we forget how important execution is, right? We have a way we do things, maybe we have it written down, but executing to that standard um, really just says so much about like, no, we have a minimum standard that we need to execute to, and then rolling into that improvement process or that improvement culture, I think is how you phrased it. Like, or how did you phrase it?
Continuous improvement culture.
Continuous improvement culture. Because that's actually something that I've been noticing a lot lately is, I did a ton of work third and fourth quarter last year on getting processes written down, getting them documented.
Sure.
Certainly not perfect by any means, but progress, not perfection, I guess.
Absolutely.
But then even just rolling into the first quarter, I mean, we're just hitting the second month, and we already, because of the work that I've been doing with you on the org chart, which has been monumental in helping get some more structure into the business, we had to change a bunch of processes. We moved some things around. We noticed that, like, when we were looking at the org chart and the, what the hell's the term, Bill? Functional accountabilities,
Functional accountabilities. All right.
right? So we start laying out those functional accountabilities and then realizing that, like, hey, this functional accountability really is a part of this role on the org chart, and this person is executing that role. That means we need to move this process over to them, which actually changes the process. So now we've got to improve the process. We've got to change that written standard work. Like, it's just so all interconnected, and it is just to be fair, like, it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, so it's funny. I enjoy it, but man, to the contrary, there's people out there that this frightens the ever living daylights out of, when we talk about this stuff. And in any organization, you're going to have a mix of both types of people. So bridging that gap and transitioning over to that continuous improvement culture is a substantial objective. And um, I think there's a lot of people out there that are scared of it as just a general statement, and then there's others that just don't have a full appreciation for what it takes to convert. So, because of those two categories, there's a lot of people that have been exposed to some of the stuff we're talking about that it's left a bad taste in their mouth, if you will, because
Mhm.
of that, that lack of follow through, that lack of seeing it through to the finish. And as as I go into the work that I do, that's always something I have to kind of watch out for is really quickly I need to get the detractors, the people that push back because of their past bad experience with something like this. I have to quickly get their objections out in the open and be able to address them to get them to consider the idea of like, quote, trying this again, um,
Yeah.
and then show them how it's different when it's done right. So, but yeah, continuous improvement culture, you nailed it. These are not static documents. And I mentioned a minute ago that if we organize them in that three-piece hierarchy there, that helps us manage the document lifecycle. And that's critically important because these are evergreen processes you're going to find a shortfall or a problem, and you're going to change the process to fix that problem.
Hmm.
And if they're not organized correctly, that editing and changing of the processes and then retraining based on the process becomes overwhelming in itself. And that's just a structural thing, right? That's easy to overcome if you know how to structure the system. So it's all real.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually built a table of contents document spreadsheet essentially to be able to, because one of the things that's always happened in the past with me with processes is we have folders full of written processes and you can't find a damn thing. And then you're like looking for something. I'm like, where is this? Who's got it on their hard drive or on the, where is it in Google Drive? And you're searching, and then you find four different versions of it.
Sure.
And so one thing we did was we created a spreadsheet, table of contents, and then I have it broken up basically by each. I forget what the term that you call it is.
Each
About,
function or
no,
each.
no, a value stream.
Oh, but on the value stream, sure.
So I have it broken down by value stream, right? So then, so that it's easier. So like someone that's working on our buying local value stream can
Right.
find all the processes for buying local. They can find the website value stream processes. They can find the marketing support services and go through each one like that. And then, but one thing I did was I added a date last edited column on that spreadsheet so that I
Right.
can see when was the last time that we edited this document? Like, when was the last time we updated it? So that way I know, like, if there's a process in there that we haven't touched, we haven't updated in 6 months, is it still working? So I can go through on a quarterly basis now and look and see, like, hey, this process hasn't been touched in 6 months. I need to revisit it with the team, make sure everything is still this is still the way we do it, right? Like we haven't changed something and not edited the document so that if we need to do a knowledge transfer to a new hire, it's there's just so much value in all this work. And it's like I said, it's fun, but staggering. And I wanted to ask you, not to go too much off on this tangent, but I know we've got other questions to ask you, but you had mentioned the detractors, and everybody runs into this, right? Where it's like you either it's the employee that you hired and they just don't like following a process, or they're constantly pushing back. Well, this process doesn't always work because if this happens and then this happens. So, like as a business owner, how do we deal with employees? I know the simple answer is fire them, right? But like that's not always an option, and not really the attitude we want to walk into my way or the highway situation. But what do business owners do with team members that just really struggle to follow the process and really use the documentation?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And ironically, how do you fix it long term? Well, you have good process in your hiring process, right? So you have a well-documented hiring process, and then in the future, you're not hiring people that are detractors in a continuous improvement or process culture, right? So the irony of the question is the long-term fix is to put together bulletproof staffing or onboarding and hiring practices, screening practices, et cetera. But in more in the short term, I think it's just like any other change initiative. And a change initiative, I hate to admit it, but it's a lot like sales. And somebody told me once that you don't sell features, you sell benefits.
Okay.
And as a guy like me, an engineer, very, I guess you could say linear thinker or critical thinker, that really resonated with me. You don't sell features, you sell benefits. So when you talk about detractors on the team or people that are pushing back, you're always going to have them. And the way you overcome it is figuring out what's important to them and then helping them see how they will benefit from utilizing the process to achieve whatever's important to them, right? So, that's where the story probably gets a little longer, but what's important to them? Well, at this point, everybody's read the book, The Love Languages, and apparently they've got a professional book now too that talks about kind of using similar thinking. But I haven't read the book. Apparently, it's out. My point is for years, when you talk about what's important to somebody, it comes back to the love languages book that's focused on relationships. We'll just take that into the office and just know that physical touch probably isn't appropriate in the office, but the rest of the love languages,
Yeah.
have a place. And so as you look at your employee, figure out what's important to them. Is it words of affirmation? Is it being celebrated publicly or privately? Is it compensation? Is it rewards? Is it gifts? Like what is it that motivates them? Is it a job well done? Is it feeling like they had success at work? And then tying that motivation, that individual motivation for them back to the process is really the best tool I've found to take somebody that doesn't naturally kind of trend that way and kind of bring them over to the dark side.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned hiring, right? And so, how does having strong processes change hiring, training, performance?
Yeah.
Especially in high turnover industries. I mean, which is basically every industry at this point.
Yeah, high turnover is every industry, but I got to say, in the trades specifically right now, turnover is brutal, right?
Yeah.
Hiring people and hiring good people is tough. The talent pipeline in the trades is a huge challenge. It's a challenge that I've spoken to two of my most recent clients about. Both of them are in the trades, and both of them are struggling with talent pipeline and retention. So, yeah, that's a good question. We established already that standard work or strong process that establishes an objective standard for performance, right? So if we take that same thinking into hiring team members, if we have an objective standard for performance that's written down, we can have a literal scorecard from which to evaluate candidates when they submit their resume, right?
Mhm.
And if they pass that initial screening based on their resume, then we have what would used to be called a phone screen. Now it's a Google screen, right? It's a video meeting. Now we have a video meeting to screen that candidate. So a 1 hour video meeting to screen that candidate against a second level scorecard based on these objective criteria for the role. And if that's successful, we then interview them with a final scorecard to make sure that they either meet or don't meet the objective criteria for the role. And what this does is this allows us to screen out most of the bad resumes, then have a video screening for a half hour, ideally, an hour max, but a half hour ideally. And we video screen maybe 3 or 4 people. As soon as we find somebody that passes that objective criteria on the video screening, we invite them in for an in-person or on-site interview. And if we follow this process of having objective criteria and then scoring people against the objective criteria, we've taken away the relative comparison. We don't care about the rest of the candidates. We just care about the first guy or the first lady that we talk to that meets the criteria at each step. And if we do that, we commonly wind up interviewing less than 2 people for the job and hiring one of those 2 people. In comparison, I think what a lot of organizations still do today is they say we need 25 interviews or we need 10 interviews.
Hmm.
And to get to those 10 interviews, God knows how many resumes they look at and how many screenings they do. But can you imagine 10 interviews that take, somewhere between an hour and 3 hours each? That's like 30 to what, 90 hours of interviewing for one position that might turn
Yeah.
over a year. To the contrary, if you have standard work, that you've created an objective measure of what good performance looks like, an objective standard, and then you screen against that objective standard. And what we found is that with that kind of process on the HR side of the business, you typically interview less than 2 for each role, and then you hire that person, and retention is through the roof. Now, other things influence retention, to be clear, but first impression and hiring the right person, those 2 things are the first opportunity to positively impact retention, and we see a huge mix. So
I'm wondering, I have this theory about process inside an organization that when you hire team members, and especially from a small business standpoint, right? Because small businesses are chaotic, right? Like the longer you've been in business, the more solidified you are in your way of
stable,
doing things,
right?
right? But smaller businesses, especially younger businesses, it's just chaos. Like, and we're, even though we've been, I've been doing this for 12 years now. Realistically, my current company is only a couple years old because coming out of COVID, we had to restructure, we had
Sure.
changes, all these different things happened. So it's like we basically had to start over. And not even basically, we did start over.
You're not alone. I mean, I can't tell you how many small and mid-sized companies either went out of business or restructured and survived, but kind of had to start over. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a real, I help a lot of organizations through that exact struggle. So that's, yeah, you're not alone. And I'm assuming a lot of the listeners have faced it too.
Yeah, it can be pretty rough. Like especially where I'm at in my career and how long I've been doing this, I anticipated being further down the path at this point, right? And Derek and I have talked about this a lot too, and it's just like, we had to start over. What are you going to do? But I'm just, so my theory about process in business is that it just like with kids, giving kids structure is good for them. They can count on things, right? They feel better about their lives. And I feel the same way, but I don't really have any evidence to this that having structure and process in a business gives your employees like a feeling of security
Totally.
and can help with retention, right? Because who wants to be a part of an organization that's just chaotic and stressful all the time and everything changes every other week? And can you
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit? I mean, do you see that with the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, I see it 100%. And um, could certainly share stories that I've seen, but I think the one thing that I realized best sums that up. So, and I think we talked about this in some context once before, but slightly different. The Gallup organization has a 2 book series that I'm a big fan of. And these books have been around now, they've been around for, I don't know, 20 years. I think I read these 20 years ago, but it has a 2-part book series, and the titles have changed subtly over the years in like the latest incarnation of each, but it's the books are First Break All the Rules and Now Discover Your Strengths. And again, there may be subtle title changes in the latest publication of the book, but
Mhm.
essentially those are the 2 books. You can Google and find them in a heartbeat. In Now Discover Your Strengths, um, or excuse me, in First Break All the Rules, the Gallup organization did this huge study to determine like what makes a great organization, what makes great leaders. And it boiled it down to, and I forget, it's 10, 11, 12, something like that, things. And one of those things is a simple question to your team. Do I know what it takes to succeed in my job? right? And do I have the tools I need to succeed in my job is one of the complementary questions to that. So if you think about standard work in the context that we're talking about, do I know what it takes to succeed in my job? Well, if there's a written down objective set of criteria that says this is what success looks like, that checks that box.
Hmm.
And if it's written down and if it's clear on how to engage it and use it, and presumably if you took the time to write it down, you probably took the time to put the tools in place too, right, to do it.
Yep.
That checks the second of the boxes in this Gallup organization kind of poll. That's again, it's like the top 10 or top 12 things that make the difference, if you will, in employees being successful and retention and all that. And so, do I know what it takes to succeed in my job, and do I have the tools that I need to do it? And standard work is a big piece of checking both of those boxes that the Gallup
Hmm.
organization through this, I don't know, bazillion people surveyed or companies surveyed, found out they were two of the top 10 critical things to be successful and to retain employees. So,
I'm actually writing this down. I'm like, I know that I've heard you say this before, but like you said that, do I know what it takes to be successful and do I have the tools to do it? Like,
yeah.
I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, I don't know if I spend enough time with my team members describing what success looks like.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because now let's take that and you're the leader of the organization, but as a leader in an organization, whether you're the top guy or the second or third, wherever you are in that hierarchy, if your role is to lead, um, I personally believe that um, making what success looks like crystal clear is your number one responsibility as a leader. And your second responsibility as a leader is to remove all the roadblocks and help the people on the team win. Like you could make sports analogies as the coach and the team. You could look at military analogies. You could look at a whole bunch of things. But as a leader, and there's some presuppositions here to be clear. You
Yep.
have to be well intended. You have to be kind and genuine. All of those things. But once all those presuppositions are met, don't be an asshole. Then making what success looks like crystal clear. So, like a sports analogy, if we're going to run a race and if we don't decide where the finish line is, how do we know if anybody won? It's that
Mhm.
simple. So we line up, Mike, I'll race you across the yard. Well, what does across the yard mean? Does it mean until we hit the fence or to the pool or like what is across the yard? Nobody knows, right? So we need to make what success looks like crystal clear. One of the ways we do that is through standard work for daily operations. And then we need to remove the roadblocks and put the tools in place for people then to be successful. So, what does that mean? If we're going to race across the yard and if there's kids' Legos spread out across the yard, we need to move the Legos because we're not going to have an effective race if we're barefoot running over Legos. Um,
Yeah.
so you can take all these kind of simple examples and it really is, it's that simple from a vision standpoint, rolling it out first and then staying true to it over time and executing to it day in and day out is where the challenge comes in, right? But
Yeah.
the concepts are there.
I'm literally sitting here thinking like I basically got rid of meetings in my company, and we do a quarterly meeting, team meeting. Here's, like we just did our first one of the year, and here's the things we're trying to accomplish. So in that case, I was detailing out like, here's what success looks like if we're able to do all these things at the end of the year.
Sure.
But what we have implemented now is instead of doing team meetings where like once a week we used to bring everybody onto a Zoom and we, have an hour long meeting, which probably could have been an email. And
Yep.
so we got rid of that. But what we do now is and not only when it's absolutely necessary, we do a huddle. So it might be a
Cool.
5 minute huddle, it might be a 15-minute huddle. Like so today, I've got a 15-minute huddle with three of my team members to talk about some work we've got to do for a client that all three of these team members are going to be touching in some fashion. And I'm thinking about it right now. I'm like, I'm going to add that to my discussion is here's what success looks like with this project.
Love it.
Because it's not something that I typically would say in that fashion. I would just say, like, here's what we need to do. But I think saying here's what we need to do, and then here's what success looks like when it's done. What our objective is. I think that's a
Yeah,
very
there's a big difference between saying, here's what we need to do, and here's what the outcome looks like if we win, right?
yeah.
It's very different in the communication. I'm glad you picked up on that. 100% with you. To the meeting thing, I have really strict rules for myself on how and when and we hold meetings and why.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, another little nugget, if you will, as a leader, if I'm calling a meeting, it's my unspoken goal that everybody in that meeting feels better when they leave the meeting, right? So they've taken away value from being in the meeting. I have some other, kind of guidelines or rules as well, but that's one that I try and bring to the table in the work that I do is every time if I pull people away to meet with me, they need to leave there saying that time was worthwhile. And that's really hard to do. It's taken years and years of polish and practice to try and get to that. And I will say, the way I measure the success. So, what does success look like as a leader that's trying to do this? It's people show up to the meeting that weren't invited. So, somebody in another department or on another project or whatever the case says, "Hey, I've heard about that meeting you have every Monday. Do you mind if I pop in? I think it would help me be successful, right?" And that's the measure of success of leading a good meeting. And so if you've had people kind of self-invite, then you know that you're doing it right, right? Because other people are talking about the meeting outside of the meeting and talking about it in a favorable way that's helping them win.
Yeah, I feel like my team is trying to get out of meetings.
Yeah,
I got some work to do.
got to look closer at that. Yeah,
Uh,
we can talk about that offline. That's a whole nother one, right?
yeah, well, I was just writing down too. We're gonna have to do an episode on Bill's rules for meetings. Dig into that because
Right.
I'm like I want to know all the rules that you have for meetings, and I'm like, well, if I want to know, I'm sure our listeners want to know. So
Well,
we'll have,
somebody's in the comments right now going, Mike and Bill are going to have a meeting to talk about meetings. WT.
yeah.
I'm like, yeah. So we got to be a little careful with that. But yeah, I'm in for it. So
Well, there's a great book called Death by Meeting. I don't know if you ever read that by Patrick Lencioni. I'm a big fan of his
he's
work.
good.
Yeah, I love his stuff. But anyway, good book. Not to go off on too much of a tangent here. So we talked about what process can do for your organization. We talked about what to do when employees resist. The question I have is why do small businesses resist process so much? Even when the chaos is clearly costing them time and money, they know that process can help their organization. Why do people resist it?
Yeah. So there's a little handful of reasons, maybe, right? Like so 4 or 5 or 6 reasons I think that businesses resist, but they all come back to the leaders fundamentally flawed in their understanding, right? And when I say the leader, it doesn't always mean the formal leader.
Mm-hmm.
There's also informal leaders in business. There's people that have a heavy influence on the momentum of the organization. And it's important as the formal leader, the leader that's titled on the org chart in the leadership role, to recognize who those influencers are. And years ago, we didn't have social media. The word influencer, we would talk about these people in the organization that have heavy informal leadership or influence. And we need to identify who those people are. So as I talk about the leaders being fundamentally flawed in their understanding, leading to resistance. It's not just the formal leader, but it's also those key people that have that heavy influence on organizational momentum. But what are those handful of ways? So um, I'll try and start off with like kind of the basics and then end with like the real zingers,
Mm-hmm.
and let's never forget the big one, right? So, basic ones like we hear all the time, process takes too long. Like I can't tell you the number of times I've heard that. And
Yeah.
man, when you look at the data, process doesn't take too long. Screwing up all the time takes too long because you're redoing work, right? So process takes too long. That's a common kind of basic one. Um, Processes don't make us money. That's your typical sales guy, right? Or salesperson. You're on the sales, marketing, business development side of an organization. I can't tell you how many, or maybe they're the president today, but they
Mm-hmm.
came from the sales, marketing, BD side. Process doesn't make us money. Well, like I said, doing the wrong thing good doesn't make you any money. Let's get everybody doing the right thing good makes you money, right? So again, kind of simple stuff, but common things I hear. Um, and then as we start to pivot, like the first real good one is great teams don't need process. And you know what? You're right. If the team is small enough, you're right. But we know through sociological whatever studies, exams, et cetera, like a great team, as soon as you get above 6 people, it's really hard to have a great team, like with one leader. Yeah, that great team starts to get too big. And if you look at classic examples of hierarchy, there's a reason the hierarchy's there. And like, whether like the military, for example, the military has different units that get bigger. battalion, company, et cetera. You start getting really big. But the reason the hierarchy is there is because we know at the team level, you can only be successful leading like a half dozen plus or minus a few, people. So,
Yeah.
great teams don't need process, and not really the case. And then as we get into like the real winners, I think we're special. We can't have a standard process. That's one of the real winners, right? And I've been doing this a
My
long
business
time.
is unique,
Yeah, my
right?
business is unique. I'm special. You're
Yeah.
not, right? You're not. It's the 90-10 rule if you're lucky, but it's really the 99-1 rule most of the time, right? So we're special. We can't have standard process. And then like um, my favorite and the one that I think, a lot of people listening to this might relate to is we're too entrepreneurial for process, right? Um, that's one of my favorites. And if you look at the statistics on entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial companies, there's a lot of failure in those statistics. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? Did being too entrepreneurial for process work out for the lion's share of the people being entrepreneurial? The answer is absolutely not, right? Because the failure statistics are through the roof. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, like a handful, what was that? Six, five of things that really what it comes down to. And like I said, in my experience, they're fundamentally flawed viewpoints, right? That are um, there's a reason why they got to where they got to, but you can pretty easily dismantle that and
Mhm.
show how process would really be beneficial or make the difference. Now, emotionally, did you win them over? And are they ready to charge into a process-based continuous improvement culture? Maybe, maybe not, right? But it's pretty easy to argue those and support it with evidence.
So I know we've got to jump over to the Patreon side of things as time gets close, but before we do, kind of a two-part question. First part is when is the right time to start building process? And then the second part is what kind of real outcomes have you seen when businesses are fully committing to process?
Yeah, so I'll try and I think by default I tend to be long-winded, so I apologize. I'll try and keep these a little shorter for
Oh,
this
you're fine, man.
making the timeline. The first one was when was the right time to start building?
Yes, sir.
So the right for this audience, I think the right time to start building is when you realize that you don't want to just be self-employed, but you want to own and run a business and lead a business. There's a big difference between being self-employed and having a helper too, and leading a business. And a business is something that can scale and grow and ultimately run without you at some point, right?
Yep.
So I think the first opportunity to ask yourself, is this the right time to start building standard work process, et cetera, is do I want to be self-employed or do I really want to grow and run a business? And I don't think that one is better than the other. I mean, to be fair, I am self-employed as part of my income and I run a business as part of my income right now, right? So it's only me in one of my businesses, and it's more than me in one of my other businesses. So I'm not throwing shade in either direction, but I think that's the first opportunity. And then for people that are listening that are maybe unconsciously made the decision to run a business and they're already there, but yet things are kind of hectic and chaotic and their their team is regularly disappointing them, that those are all signs that we don't have substantial process or sufficient process. I think the next opportunity is to ask yourself, do I want to grow or sell? Right? Because if you want to grow or if you want to sell, I think standard work goes back on the table again. Or you can continue to work in the chaos that you work in, assuming it pays you the money you want to be paid and it works for everybody on the team. However big or small that team is, you could kind of continue to hover in that chaos and be okay. But as we know, when it comes time to sell, it's based on typically multipliers of EBITDA. That's what you sell on. That's how you're valued. And we know that those multipliers go up, the more stable and standard that business is, and the more that business can run without you and scale. And all at the core of all that is standard work.
Standard work.
Yeah. What was the other question?
Other question is, what real outcomes have you seen when businesses are fully committing to process?
Yeah, so I think the best case study for that, and everybody, this is another Googleable thing. Everything I talk about is easily Googled, although these days Google's kind of polluted with some good stuff and some not so good stuff. So you got to be careful, I guess, what you read on the internet. But
Yeah.
if you want to Google, what's the best example of positive outcomes from process? There's a company that's little known unless you're in the space or you're an investor. And that company is called Danaher, and their stock ticker is DHR. So if you look at a story of how Danaher came to be, Danaher grew out of the mid 80s and within less than a handful of years, less than 5 years, was on the Fortune 500. And today is like 180-ish in the Fortune 500.
Hmm.
And if you read the case studies on how Danaher did that, they did it leveraging something they developed called the Danaher Business System, or DBS. And the Danaher Business System is simply a collection of standard work that it governs how the business operates. And it allowed Danaher to acquire mom and pop manufacturing companies, industrial companies, and deploy the Danaher Business System, which again is just a collection of standard work, into those businesses and get those businesses performing, 5, 6, 10x better than they were when they were mom and pop owned because they have the standard work. So Danaher's success and its success story is probably the best single example that I know or have been exposed to that demonstrates the power of standard work and the power process.
Love it. Bill, we got to jump over to the Patreon side of things. But before we do, if people want to talk with you, maybe they want to work with you, or maybe they just got some questions, how do they find you?
Thanks, Mike. So it's Bill at the opexshop.com. That's OPEX, short for operational excellence shop.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. That's kind of the old standby. So it's William in parentheses Bill Tansey Jr. on LinkedIn, and I should pop up, and I'd love to talk to him.
You got that epic stash in your profile picture on
That's right.
LinkedIn.
No, I feel like you can't have a video call without mentioning it because it is. I mean, yeah, yeah, it is. It'll
Listen,
be here until sun tanning season comes, and then I got to shave it before I catch a tan and
then
look.
you got to shave it off.
Yeah.
I wish that I could have just a stash like that, but the way my facial hair grows, it just doesn't work out for me.
Well, my beard's gray, so that's what's discouraged me from continuing to grow the beard in the way I once did. So the porn stash it is. Here it is. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Jump on over to the Patreon side. We've got a few more questions for Bill that are going to get into the nitty gritty here. So we'll see you on the other side. Thanks for listening, everybody.
And that wraps up another episode of Blue Collar Startup. A big thank you to our sponsors, Five Towers Media, Daigle Cleaning Systems, Daigle Fire Solutions, The Michaels Group, Martin Electric, MLB Construction, Bonaccio Construction, Peoplease, and Catamount Consulting for making this podcast possible. And thank you for tuning in. If you learned something or felt inspired, connect with us on our website at bluecollarstartup.io or email us at hardhat.bcsu@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your questions and topic ideas. Help us spread the word by sharing the show and following us on social media for updates. Until next time, keep on building, keep on dreaming, and keep hustling like your future depends on it.